Welcome back to the Playwright Automation Mastery series. In the previous video, we learned about the most important user-facing locators like the getByRole, getByText, getByLabel, and getByPlaceholder. These are the basics, and these are your first and best choice for writing robust and reliable Playwright test because they focus on how you can simulate a real user truly interacting with your web application. Today in this video, we are going to dive into even more specialized locators and then introduce the incredibly powerful getByTestId strategy and finally look at traditional CSS selectors explaining when and why you might need to use each. So just like last time, we will be using the same locators demo HTML, which is, you might remember, this is the example HTML file that is running in my local machine. So let's take a look at the first uh, locator in this video, which is getByAltText. So this is used for images. So you can see in this example HTML, you see the image here. This is, let's pretend like this is a company logo, and let's inspect this and see what is actually the HTML code here is. You can see the src, the link to the image, and you can see the alt property. So based on this alt property, we can use the getByAltText to locate this image. And I have Playwright script to show for this demo. This is the demo script. Goes to the demo URL, and then we pass the test to make sure that it went there. And then look at this, the page.getByAltText. It gets the image with the alt text, named our company logo, and then it uses that alt text to locate the image, this image, and then does the click operation on that. And then we will pass the test and to see that it really clicked. And since there is no alert, as you can see, we cannot see any pop-up or anything, so we just confirm in the script that the company image logo is visible, because when the page loads, you can see here, and when the playwright clicks on the image, it actually goes to the image and we can see the image is displayed on the page. So let's run the script. You can see the page is opened here, and our playwright inspector right here. You can see the next step in the test is getByAltText. So what it is going to do is it is going to search for the image with the alt text company logo, and once it finds that, it is going to perform a click operation. This makes your test more robust because it is tied to the accessibility best practice. This alt attribute is more reliable than relying on other properties like HTML ID or using your custom CSS or XPath creative ways to identify uniquely that image. So that's the example. So let's continue with the test. When I resume the test, you can see it found the image by the alt text, and you saw a red dot here, and that's how Playwright displays that it found this alt text image, and you can see the command there shown. Again, the test is passed, and when I continue the test, the next line in the script checks that the image is visible. Of course, the image is in view, and when I run the test, it executed that line. And let me finish the test. So let's look at another locator called getByTitle. This getByTitle is used for identifying or locating elements with title attributes. So sometimes in the on the web page, you have some elements that use title attribute. So getByTitle can target these elements, which is useful attribute, the title attribute. So Let me show you. Open the demo HTML web page, the title attribute of a button. So when I scroll down, you see the delete button, delete item button, and let's inspect, and we can see that delete item button has a title property. The title is delete this item. So in Playwright you can call the page.getByTitle method and give the title as this value, and then using this title, Playwright will identify this element and then do a click operation, or check, or you can check whether this button is disabled or enabled. So in this demo script, what it does is it goes to the same demo URL and then finds the delete button using its title property, which we saw here in the code source, and then does the click operation. And the next thing it does is verifies that this button is visible on the page. So we expect this button to be visible. So it is visible. To be visible is called here, and the test checks this. So let's run this test and see what will happen. There is a report command. Let me actually run the command to execute this script. So it opened the demo URL, the demo site, and paused. So if we continue this, let me resume the test. So the next thing it is going to do is delete this button, find the delete button using the title attribute. So you can see it scrolled automatically. So you don't even need to do the scroll to element like you do in other frameworks, but it automatically scrolled, and then you can see the button is highlighted. So it identified the button. So that's a good demo there. And the next one we are going to see is getByTestId. And this is the custom test ID, which is your secret weapon. Let's say your user-facing elements attributes are not enough, or your elements don't have a good unique attribute to identify or to locate. You can always use this getByTestId, which is an excellent alternative and often consider your secret weapon, and you can use it for building stable tests. And this getByTestId relies on developers adding a specific data-testid. So let me show you in what I mean. And I have an example here. Here you can see the submit order button, and let's take a look at this source code of these buttons. And you can see, let's say this is the edit profile button, and you can see here a special attribute called data-testid is added. So this is a custom name you agreed on to elements. You can create any name, but your own custom name, you can say your own, you can give it any name. For example, here so this is more reliable and explicit link between development and testing. What I mean is that this attribute is just there for your testing purposes. So when developers change other attributes, or they add more JavaScript actions here or any other thing to this button, your test attribute is an agreement that you made with the developer, and say, hey developer, don't do anything with this. This attribute is just for testing purposes, and you agree that with your development team. So that's an agreement between QA and developer, and they put this one just for testing purposes, so your automation can reliably find the element using these attribute, because in certain cases you cannot rely on other attributes such as name or label. So you can see all these elements have data test ID, and you can use it in any tag. on HH3 or P or button tag. Here I can tell you that this button tag is what is needed here for this demo, and so we have this custom data test ID. So this is the demo script. It goes to the URL and then it finds the custom attribute that we added using this getByTestId. So getByTestId is the custom ID for testing purposes. So it finds a data, it finds the element, it locates the element by using its data test ID, which is edit profile button. So getByTestId means it gets this test ID. So it is used for testing purposes. That's why they call it test ID. So let's run this script and see for ourselves how it's going to perform. So the page is opened, and when I resume the script, you can see the red dot here and it highlights the element. So it clicked on the element, so that's why we see the red dot, the action that it performed. So you can see that it identified this button based on the test ID, data test ID. So when I resume the test, it's going to check whether the person name and his email address are visible on. So when I go back, I see the test passed. And coming back to the test ID, this getDataByTestId is the default Playwright way. But if you want to define your own custom test ID, let's say you can talk to your developer and say, I want to define my own test ID as my test ID, or you can give any test ID. If you don't like this default, to do that you have to go to your config file, which is the playwright.config.ts, and there if you go to the use block here, and here you need to define your own, you can define your own own test ID attribute, for example data QA ID, or you can give it any name. Even simply you can say for testing purpose, or you can simplify as QA ID or test ID. You can call it whatever name you want. And once you configure that one, and when you go to your test and when you run it the next time, what Playwright is going to do is, okay, this project has a custom test ID attribute, so I'm going to look at the attribute test-id with the name edit profile button. By default it is going to look at the data test ID attribute, but now we have overridden that with our own custom test ID. So let's run this test and see. It should fail because we have overridden the default one. So you can see here, and now it's going to find by the default, not by the default, the overridden, the new test ID that we have defined, which is test-id attribute, but the page doesn't have this attribute, so it should fail. So first of all, always prefer user-facing locators first. The getBy role is the top choice, and you should always try to use that first, because it reflects how a real user would interact, and also it has this it shows it acts in the same way as how the real user and other accessibility tools interact with the page. And the next one you should try is getByText. So this is straightforward, and it is an excellent way for interacting with the buttons, links, or verifying the visible text on the page. And then followed by this, you should use getByLabel, getByPlaceholder, getByAltText, page.getByTitle. So these are the things you should use whenever you have the corresponding attribute. You have to uniquely and stably identify the element. Why? Because if visible text or role changes, a user will also notice that change, right? So making it a valid failure. If the internal HTML ID changes, right? For example, the ID changes or the name, your test will still remain stable when you use these roles or text or label or alt text. When even when the developer changes the other things, other attributes of the element, your test will still use these to reliably locate the element. And the next powerful thing and the best option to use is get by test ID. If your locators are not cannot be identified uniquely and there is no enough description or simply they cannot be identified, you should collaborate with the developers to add a data test ID, which is the default custom attribute name, or you can develop or you can come up with a friendly custom attribute and configure that as we saw before in the playwright config.ts file. So this is a powerful option that you should use, and because this gives you a stable hook into the DOMs in the DOM that's explicitly meant for testing, and it is very stable and less likely to change unexpectedly, and you will not have any surprise tomorrow when something changes in the DOM. You will still be confident that your custom attribute, the agreement that you made with your developer, is there, and your tests are stable and they are more robust and they still pass despite the fact that the developer changed other attributes or other things in the DOM. And then finally, you should resort to CSS locators or XPath only when necessary. Only when if all the above options did not work for you and you cannot add the data test ID also, then you should try to use CSS locators and XPath, which we will cover in the next video. Of course, these CSS selectors and XPath are also powerful, but they can be brittle. They rely on the page's internal HTML structure, such as the structure of the DOM, and they also depend on the class names or the HTML IDs. So even a small UI refactoring or any unexpected or accidental changes or typo introduced can easily break your test. However, sometimes they are your only way to target a complex element or a specific state. So when it comes to CSS locators, this should be your last resort for identifying your locators uniquely. So when using user-facing locators, um, they are preferred, but there are times when you need to use standard CSS locators. So that's where Playwright's page.locator method is used for these. So let's take a look at the demo script or the demo HTML file here, which is already there in the HTML file, and that is the product details. Let's take a look at an example CSS locator, and let's consider this add to cart button, and let's inspect this. So you can see that this is the section, product details section, and you can see there is a button with the class add to cart button, and we can see how we can use the CSS the page.locator to identify the HTML, identify this element, the product details, using the HTML ID. So let me copy the script and we can run it. So let me show you the working script. So this is our example demo test, and what it does is it goes to the demo URL, and then this is the page, and it does locates the product details using the HTML ID, which is the hashtag product details. Hash means the ID, so product dash details is the ID. So we give the ID to this page.locator. So page.locator is the method that is used to identify using the DOM ID, the selector. So it resolves to the DOM element product details by using the ID, and then it checks that the ID is visible. So in the same way, dot represents the class. So page.locator can be used for identifying a class. So there is an item that, and you can see there is an item dot list with a class. This is a class name. So to identify an element with the ID, you use hashtag in front of the actual ID. And if you want to identify an element by its class name, so you give the class name and then you put a dot in front of the class name. So dot means it is actually the HTML ID. So page.locator can locate an element by giving by when you can specify that Playwright can locate the element using its HTML ID or using the class name. And here it checks that the element is visible. And then you have another case where where if you want to identify by tag name, you can also do that with the same page.locator. And UL, you can see here is the list, and in the HTML code, and you can see that there are a lot of UL elements here, and UL it's a list of items. So you can see here the block here, and when you say UL, it's going to identify the locator and make sure that is visible. You can also use the page.locator to identify an element using by a class on a tag. So you can combine many things. So you can take an li list item. So you can see here there is a list item here, and you can get to the specific one. So if I say li, so it highlights many things here. So you get the idea. So you can use the same page.locator for identifying a specific tag, and then we saw many li tags, but you want to filter a specific li tag using its class name. So what this means is a class name of an li tag, and it's going to pick that element and check whether that element is visible. And the same page.locator can also be used to locate an element by its attribute. So you can see here the name equal to data input, and you can put that in the inspector, the developer, the find here, and you can see that this input is the input has this unique name attribute. And yeah, so if you right click on it, and you can actually jump to the source and see this input tag has a name attribute of data input. So that's why you have the name equal to data input, and then it's going to type in the CSS example here in this, and then finally it checks that the text that we typed here it's actually there. So let's run this script. Yeah, there's a missing bracket here, so let me copy the script again. So let's run the script and see it in action. And we have the script running, and let me bring the Playwright inspector, and the test has stopped. And when I resume the test, it's what the next step it's going to action the test is going to do is it is going to locate the product details by its HTML ID, and you can see the test passed. And when I resume the script, let me adjust this window. So when I resume the script, it's going to check the next locator using its class name. So that is visible, and we already know that is visible because we saw that it's in the same page. So here it is. And when I resume this test, it's going to it's failed actually. So you can see what happened here. So you see all the steps passed except this one. So when you click, it says line number 90 locator to be visible. Why this happened? Because when you say find the tag, find an element using the UL tag, you see there are a lot of UL. So it doesn't know which one. So you need to make it more specific. And you can see the error context here, which gives more detailed information. We will see this in another video, but you got the idea that these are the various ways you can identify. These are the various CSS locators. So just use page.locator and then your custom CSR locator uh, to uniquely identify your element. So these are very faster and easier to read than XPath. So these are powerful tool to use when the user-facing locators or the test IDs are not feasible. But remember, they tie your test more closely to the HTML structure. When you do these things, these are the actual HTML attributes. So if there's a typo here, or if this name gets deleted accidentally, unintentionally, then your test might break. So that's a risk that you're taking, and your test is not reliable when you use page.locator. But it's simple and straightforward and easy. So in rare cases, in cases where you cannot find a user facing locator or a user test ID, you can use this. So you should now have a solid understanding of the best practices for choosing the right locator for your test. In our final video, which is the Playwright Locators, the next part, we will take a look into more advanced locator techniques like chaining and filtering locators. And I will give you a quick overview of XPath when you absolutely need it. And I will also show you how Playwright's built-in tools like the Playwright Inspector we just saw and the CodeGen can drastically help you find and debug locators. So don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part, and please leave your questions in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one.